Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. I'm casting on another 4th ridge pocket scarf, and today I'll be demonstrating the chained cast on. This cast on is not super stretchy, which is fine for a garment like a scarf, and it closely matches a plain bind off. Stay tuned because I'll compare the two at the end of the video. If you are a proficient crocheter, this method should be pretty easy to pick up, but don't feel like you have to be a crocheter to give it a try. You're going to need a crochet hook for this method, and the size of the hook isn't extremely critical, but I find it easiest to use a hook that's about the same size as my knitting needle. Let's get started. Like most cast-ons, the chained cast-on begins with a slip knot, but instead of placing the slip knot on our knitting needle, instead we're going to put it on the crochet hook and then pull the working yarn to tighten things up. And you don't need to leave an excessively long tail, just enough to weave in later. And I'm going to just kind of hold that down for now so that it stays out of the way. I like to tension my working yarn by weaving it over, under the fingers on my left hand. And I'll pick up that knitting needle and get things set up in what I like to think of as the home position. So my hook and needle are parallel to each other, and my working yarn is behind the knitting needle, so it's at the back of the needle. To cast on that first stitch, I'm going to rotate my crochet hook, go over the knitting needle, under the working yarn, hook that working yarn, and then pull it through the loop. And I have one stitch on my knitting needle, and now I need to reposition my yarn so that I'm back in that home position. So I'll pivot the hook and needle together and bring the yarn between them, and then behind the knitting needle again. Cast on another stitch by bringing the hook over the needle, under the working yarn, and hook it, and pull it through the loop. Pivot to get the yarn back in that home position, and then do it again. The hook goes over the needle, under the yarn, and through the loop. Pivot and reposition the yarn, and continue on like this until you've cast on one less stitch than your pattern calls for. I need to cast that final stitch onto my knitting needle, pivot to get back in the home position. And now I have one less stitch on my knitting needles than the pattern calls for. And that last stitch is going to be the one that's currently on my hook. So I'm going to open things up just a little bit so that we can manipulate and see things a little bit easier. My knitting needle rotates back towards me and then through the loop so that the tip of the needle is pointing towards the hook, and then I'll very carefully pull that hook out and pull on my working yarn to tighten things up, and then my stitches are cast on and I'm ready to start knitting. Now let's zoom in and take a very close look at the edge of a scarf that I just bound off using a plain bind off, compared to the stitches that I just cast on with a chained cast on. And you can see that that edge matches pretty closely in appearance, making them a well-suited pair to start and end a project like a scarf. I hope you enjoyed learning how to do a chained cast on. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your knitting friends. If you'd like to try this technique in a pattern, head over to the shop section of thechillydog.com and look for my 4th ridge pocket scarf. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!